hi everyone. So today I actually want to go over kind of one of the biggest faults that I see happening with the snatch movement or the clean movement, and that is not having your arms loose enough when you come to that hip extension. So, and we'll talk about both the snatch and the kettlebell swing, but the biggest common fault is that people tend to freak out and use their arms when they get to some kind of a snatch movement. So what happens is they think, oh my god, that bar is too heavy, I have to pull it up with my arms to get it up overhead. And what happens is you lose a lot of that extension of your hips to get that bar up overhead. And so people tense up in their arms, the bar comes out here, or they tend to kind of bend their arms right away and tighten them up before they really reach that full hip extension. And just to kind of demonstrate for you guys sort of the difference between the two. So imagine if your arm is really stiff, okay, like this PVC pipe, and here's the weight that you're trying to like raise up and down and get underneath. So if you're trying to, raise the weight up and down, this takes a long time to be able to do that if your arms are very stiff. And there's not a lot of speed happening with the snatch versus if your arms, okay, so if you're attached to the shoulder here and this is your arm and you're trying to get underneath, see how fast that snap was? Because your arms are loose, you're actually controlling the weight by not your arms, okay? Your arms aren't doing the work, but some other force, which is, at the base of the band, your shoulders and your hips, that are causing that weight to pop up really fast so that you can get underneath, okay? So what I want to go over today is a few different mobility tips that you can use to make sure that your arms are like ropes, okay? So that's a big thing, pretending that your arms are exactly like ropes, so that when you do come into the snatch, you don't tense up the arms and start to bend them, right away and start to use them, but you really work on the extension of the hips, and then your arms are just there along for the ride. Or same with any kind of, kettlebell swing, where you want to use the hips and the arms are just there along for the ride to get you into the position underneath that weight, okay? So I like to usually look up other mobility videos to get kind of a good idea of like what's out there, what other people have done. And so I found this really awesome video that I think kind of really demonstrates the best way to really keep the arms loose during the snatch. Alright guys, so let's break down this mobility movement just a little bit and see how it's actually going to work. So the technical term for this mobility movement is called the flinging arm swing. And for something like this, for any kind of mobility movement, it's always good to do something for at least 2 minutes to find any bit of change. So what I recommend is going for 10 seconds on, set 10 seconds off for about 2 minutes, so that's about 6 rounds of trying this out. So some of the key points that I'd like you to notice. First of all, you have to make sure that your arms are slightly internally rotated. So when you're setting up for the snatch, believe it or not, like with your elbows pointed slightly out, your arms are actually slightly internally rotated on that snatch. And you want to keep that same motion as you're doing this mobility drill, because if you actually externally rotate, you're going to tighten up your back muscles, and then you're going to actually lose a lot of that looseness that you're going to be able to get in your arms. So slight internal rotation, and then you should be able to move your arms a lot more freely. The second thing to notice, so if you looked at the video, notice that her trunk is incredibly stable, okay? Now the only reason why you're able to make something loose is if there's something very stable that's holding it in place so that you are able to snap everything, your arms in such a place. So you gotta keep your upper back, so you wanna make sure you squeeze that upper back. Also your lats, you wanna make sure everything, and your lower back is squeezed as well. So keeping your core very stable as you do 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off of this drill. Okay, so those are the key points. Slight internal rotation. Last thing is just making sure that the elbows are pointed out to the sides, and that's going to really make sure that the arms are moving as freely. Again, keeping that core stability. If you don't keep that core stability, then basically your upper back is not going to be able to support a lot of that weight, and you're not going to get quite the movement that you will get in your arms. Okay, so let's talk about the second mobility drill. Okay, So we have a wrist flap drill, and this is again really good for getting a lot of good mobility in the wrist. You can even combine this sometimes with the flinging arm swing if you have the ability to do that. This is a very advanced move. I don't really know a lot of people that can actually combine both flinging arms and then the wrist flaps as well. But if you feel like your wrists are actually kind of tight, and it's the same thing in the snatch, you know, keeping that stable upper back, you want to make sure that your wrists are loose as well. If that's really tight, you're not going to be able to get that turnover as you are going to be able to at the bottom of that snatch. So, and if you think back to the wrist mobility drills that we did about like video 4 or 5, this is another additional one that I think would also really benefit if you're ever doing anything with a lot of cleans, something that involves a lot of turnover of the wrist, dumbbell snatches, and anything involving a front rack position whenever you need to mobilize those wrists. So similar, I would say 2 minutes, 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off, doing this. A really great routine to implement into any kind of warm-up, especially if you're going to PR lift later on, or doing some kind of ollie lift, for example. To the kettlebell swing, again, we really want to focus on using those hips to help generate the weight up and not necessarily our arms. And usually a lot of times with the kettlebell swing, especially if the weight's like really light, we see a lot of people kind of raising the arms first as the hips come up, and they're not really utilizing the hips. So this is a really good technique that you can use to help in terms of mobility, waking up the hips and getting them pop open. So notice how my arms are doing totally like ropes. I'm not really like utilizing them. They're just kind of there, but my hips are popping and doing all the work. So this tight squeezing of the glutes, popping the hips back, hinging forward, popping it forward, and then hinging back. And that's what's really going to drive that kettlebell swing later on. If you need to, you can practice this with a lighter kettlebell, and just, again, your arms are along for the ride. And eventually, you can move up to the heavier kettlebell. So, thanks for joining me for the March Movement and Mobility Challenge. And I hope you have a fabulous rest of the year in terms of getting much better mobility and movement. And I'll see you around.